Hello everyone and welcome to today's lesson, lesson 7, where we're beginning to start making our very own games in Scratch. So this lesson is all about platformers, and I know you guys already have a great idea of what platformers are. Some of you have already been emailing me your platformer projects that you guys have already made in Scratch. So with that in mind, let's take a moment to look how we make these platformer games, because sometimes they can be a little bit confusing. For the moment, let's look at today's challenge. We're going to have a look at creating an animation. And that is to make our sprites look like they're running when they're in the game. We're going to be looking at moving the player left and right along the screen as well. And we'll be making a scrolling background. So if you looked at that Make It Fly tutorial, you'll have a good idea of how to make a scrolling background yourselves. But just in case you haven't had a chance to look at it, we'll cover it a little bit in today's lesson as well. Most importantly about today's lesson, we're going to start being able to jump in the lesson as well. So what I did, guys, is I took the lesson 4 Super Mario and I changed it a little bit so that we can add a few sprites in and make it so that we can have Mario and Luigi jumping, so it's a bit of a two-player game as well. So with that in mind, let's have a look at adding our sprites. First of all, I'm going to need you guys to add a sprite with at least 3 costumes. Now that means you can use one from the library or you can make your own, like I did with Super Mario. So I have one of his foot out front, I have him one standing still, and I have one with his foot out behind him as well. So when you put the 3 together and you add them in as 3 separate costumes with your sprite, it'll make Mario look like he's running. If we want to have a quick look at how that looks, we can start by having a look at the project that I have completed. And just on that note, guys, as well, I've been looking at the studio all week and it has been amazing what you guys have created. So already we have over 230 projects in the studio, which is crazy. I don't think there's any other studios on Scratch that has that many projects in it. So well done to everybody who's uploaded their project. It's crazy the amount of response we've gotten, and I have to thank you all for that. You have all been fantastic. You have all learned so much. And I'm sure you all think of yourselves as creators and designers now at this point. So on that note, let's get back to our lesson. And let's have a look at what it is we'll be making today. So here's my lesson 7, Super Platformer 1, which is a little bit of a tongue twister for myself. But here's how it looks in the game. Okay, so as you've seen, there was both Mario and Luigi running around there. They're both able to jump up, and if you noticed very carefully that they're both jumping slightly different from each other. So if I go into my starter project where we've just taken out all of the code, and don't forget, guys, you can always remix the project here by clicking on the remix tree and remixing the project. That way you have all of the sprites I'm using in today's lesson, and you can use it in your very own project. So let's have a look at the sprites here. I've got Mario, and if I go into my costumes tab, you can see the 3 sprites I've made. And if I'll zoom in really quick so you guys can see him. There he is with his leg out front, standing still, and leg behind. Now I also added in a costume for jumping as well, although it doesn't really look like you can see it when he is jumping himself. So at least if you make a sprite with those 3 costumes, then we'll be able to get on with the lesson pretty well. The first thing we need to do is make sure we add the movement. So when we're talking about movement, we need to use an event that says when the left arrow key is pressed, we should do something. So let's have a look. Let's break down the code a little bit there. We have our when our left arrow key is pressed, we can point in the direction of minus 90 degrees. Now why am I saying minus 90 degrees, guys? Well, that is because we're looking in the, if I grab my pen, we're looking in the left direction. So we're using left, and we're going to be pointing. Mario is going to be looking this way, so we want to point him in the direction of minus 90 degrees. Now that means we need to use our left and right, or set rotation left and right block as well. So before we get into the movement, let's maybe look at adding those blocks in ourselves. Go into my starter project, and if I go into Luigi for a second, we might see that I've added some script there already. And that's just so that I remember what to put in for Mario as well. So let's start with the first block. It's when our green flag is clicked. I just wanted to set the rotation style to left and right. So with that in mind, now we can look at adding our left arrow key in. We can say when the left arrow key is pressed instead of when the space is pressed. Now we can say point in the direction of minus 90 degrees. And what do we do next then? Of course we use the loop, because we're going to change x by minus 7 for just as long as we're pressing that left arrow key. That's why we can use the repeat until block, you guys. We can use it to say repeat until we are no longer not pressing the left arrow key. So when we say when we're pressing the left arrow key, which is up here, when we're pressing it, we want to change x by 7 until we're no longer pressing it, and that's when we use the second when the left arrow key is pressed to say end the repeat until. Let's get out of the loop and just go down to the bottom of the code here. So hopefully you guys all see how that works, and what it'll do for your code is it'll mean that when you press the left arrow key, instead of just changing by x by minus 7, you can get it to repeat changing x by minus 7, so it makes it go a little bit faster as well, and it's not as, you don't have to tap and tap and tap and tap and tap on the keyboard. You can simply just let it repeat itself until it's done. So let's look at adding that movement into the code now. First thing we need to do is grab our repeat until block. We're going to say use the operator today not. And we're going to say that when the left arrow key is no longer being pressed, so we should use our key space pressed again and say when the left arrow key is no longer being repeated, then we can end the code down here. So what do we do when the left arrow key is being pressed, you guys? What do we need to do? Well, we need to change the X position. So let's have a look at changing the X position here. We can add the block in and we can say change X. Now I used minus 7. I used 7 for moving right and I used minus 7 for using left. If you want to change the speed, make them run a bit faster, change it to whichever one you like, as long as you remember to put the minus sign in front of it when you're going left and the plus sign in front of it, or no sign at all, when you're going in the right direction as well. So what do I mean by that? Well, let's have a look at the right arrow key being pressed. So in this case, we're doing the exact same steps again. We're using point in the direction of 90 degrees. Then we're going to repeat until we are no longer touching the right arrow key. And we're going to change X by 7 this time. So you can see if we're pressing left and right at the same time, what do you think will happen? You guys type it into the chat box there if you think you know. Is it going to be moving minus 7? Is it going to be moving 7? Which way is it going to be pressed if we're pushing both keys at the same time? Of course, it's going to be moving nowhere. So the two movements are going to cancel each other out and Mario is going to be stuck frozen. He's not going to be able to move in each direction. So let's have a look at it moving now. We can just copy our code here. And we can say, instead of saying when the left arrow key is pressed, we'll change that to when the right arrow key is pressed. That of course means we'll change the point in the direction. We'll change it to facing right, and that's 90 degrees. And then we'll repeat until the right arrow is no longer being pressed. And we can change X from saying minus 7 to just 7. So if we want to check out how that code looks now, we can see that Luigi's running around because he has all the code he needs. And Mario is catching up. We can get Mario to look like he's gliding. So we still have a wee bit to go. And it's nice, we can see Luigi running around, and maybe we want to know how to make Luigi run around like that. Well, how we do that is by animating the movement. So to start animating, you guys, all we need to do is change the costumes. We need to tell the costumes then to wait 0.5 seconds and make sure that the left and the right rotation is set properly. So like I said at the start of the lesson, I just wanted to check to see where my set rotation style block was. And what I did is I added the block into this block of code here. So I also set the volume to 30% just so that it didn't blow the ears off you guys in the lesson. You can set it to 100% or you can set it to 70% if you would prefer. Then make sure to set the rotation style to left and right. And now we can look at animating Mario as well. So first of all, I use my forever block. And that's just to say keep repeating until the project is finished or the project is over. Then we're going to switch the costume to costume number 2, then wait for 0.5 seconds, switch it to costume number 3, and then of course switch it to costume number 4. Now there is a little bit of a cheat here, guys, if you're only using the 3 costumes, like I told you guys to do. So let me see, if we go into Mario and we go to the costumes, let's just for a moment get rid of the jumping costume. We won't need that in this lesson. And let's say we have just the 3 costumes. Now if we look at that code one more time, we're doing the same block of code over and over and over again. So what we can do instead, you guys, if we're just automatically always going to be running, if the background is always going to be moving, just like in the Make It Fly tutorial, we don't need to say switch costume to 2. We can say next costume instead. So let's have a look at doing that, you guys. First of all, we need to grab our rotation block, so we'll say forever. And we'll grab our wait block as well. And then we can use our next costume block as well. So what we can do here is, guys, we can say wait for 0.05 seconds, and we can use change to the next costume. I'll also add in my set volume to 30%, just so that you guys can, whoa, maybe not 3 billion%. We'll go with 30%. So just that you guys can hear the project, it doesn't overpower you when you're listening to it. So let's have a look at it now. Okay, and it looks like Mario is running around quite nicely at this point. So this is great. It means we've got our animations down, we've got our movements down as well. We know we're going to be using the repeat until blocks for our movement. We're going to be using forever, and we're going to be using our looks tab to get our next costume, and we'll be using our control tab to get our wait 0.05 seconds. And it saves us from having to do all of this code here down to here. We can just use the next costume instead and one of the wait 0.5 seconds. So let's have a look at the Make It Fly tutorial for a second, guys. I know I got a couple of questions from some of you guys during the week, so what I'm saying is I'll show you how to get to it. You want to click on the question mark or the tips button in the Scratch project page. That'll let you do it that way. So let's have a look how to do it. We go to our project again. What did I say when I meant the question mark? There's a tiny little question mark just over here in the corner, guys. If you click on it, you'll see loads of tutorials that go step by step. There's how-to tutorials, and there's what the blocks mean as well. But don't worry about them. We'll look at our step by step, and you can see the Make It Fly tutorial here. So what you can do is you can check out the list of steps, which is adding all the bits you need to make your characters look like they're flying. Or you can click here to start and go by each of these steps one by one. So for today's lesson, what I did was added a few scripts that we can use from that lesson, such as clouds and trees. And if you've seen the trees moving about, that's because we have a little bit of code there to do it, as well as the code for maybe a bush as well. So let's have a look at this code first. The first thing we need to do is add the sprites in the script. So like I said, follow the tutorial and get through it. Then it'll show you where to add the sprites from, and if you want to make up your own sprites, you can as well. Then the next thing is, one of the big things from it is the background, the scrolling backgrounds. Okay guys, it'll tell you to do code that looks a bit like this. So you have your forever block, it tells you to set X to 250, which is at the far right hand side of the stage. And it'll tell you to switch the costume and then repeat by 100 to change it by -5. So that means we're going to be changing the tree by -500, and once it goes all the way to the other side of the screen, it'll disappear for a while, and then we'll tell it to set X back to 250, so it jumps back to the start, changes the costume so it looks like a different tree, and then it goes down and it moves across again. So we'll have a look at doing that now just for 1 second, just to see that it's solidified in. If I play my project, we can see the tree moves on, and once it goes off the screen, it comes back, it changes its costume, and it goes again. And that's what we're doing with our forever loop there. But you might see a bit of other code there as well, guys. There's some code to say my sprite 2 here is doing the same thing, except I've just changed it slightly to say instead of changing costume, I'm not going to bother changing. There is no other costume for this one. I've said we're going to use the green flag. We're going to say hide this platform for 10 seconds and then show it, and then you can go and start doing your forever loop. So what we do there is we delay the first platform by 10 seconds, so it gets the player a chance to understand how to move in the game, how to run about and do things, and then once we have a platform showing up, we can start thinking about trying to jump up onto it. So if I have a look at my sprite there, I'm going to call this one Platform 1. Platform 1, let's call it, yeah. And now we can have a look at my second sprite here, which is my tree. If I go into my Costumes tab, I'll show you guys how I made it first of all. Let's have a look here. So here we have a lovely tree. What I did was I went into vector mode on this, and I created, using a couple of ellipses, I just created a couple of ellipses there, made it look like a nice bush, and then I used a rectangle for the bottom just so there was no gaps. Well, you know what I mean. Let's maybe do that a little bit better so I can show you guys what I actually did. Oops. So we can bring that right up to the edge. There we go. And we bring this one right up to the edge as well. So now we have the inside of the tree or the bush itself. What I did next, guys, is I just used the paint bucket tool, changed it to a nice dark green, and I filled it in everywhere we had the bushes. Now you can keep the lines if you'd like to keep it like that. But I got rid of them. I just painted in the lines as well by hovering over each line and getting rid of it there. Oops. And that's how we made the bush there. But as you can see, I already have a bush here, so I won't be using it. So all I can do there is just go back on top of all of that. Don't need to use it. You can see step by step how we made the bush. And this is what we had in the end. So you can make a couple of different costumes for this one as well, guys. You don't need to use it. Sorry about that. We don't need to use the same costume over again. We can change the costume just like we did with the tree. And we can add in just a little bit different code as well, guys. So what do I mean by adding in a little bit of different code? Well, in fact, I've got my code a little bit mixed up here. Let's start with the clouds first of all, right? We have the clouds here. And we don't want the clouds to start appearing down here at the bottom. So what we can do is we can change the code that we see in the make it fly tutorial. We can say, instead of saying set x to 250, we can tell the cloud to go to x 250, which is where we told the trees to go as well. Go start at 250. And then we can say to pick a random position between minus 45 and 160 for y. So why do I want to pick a random position between minus 45 and 160? Because we're going to be using the y coordinate here. So if we have a look here, we have the mouse is moving up and down, and we can see in this corner here, just keep an eye over in this corner for a moment. You can see that the y-axis is changing dramatically. That means we're going to be moving up and down. And so each time the cloud appears, we're going to want the cloud to appear in a different place. So if we want to cheat, guys, we can always drag our code on top of the cloud. There we go. And we can take out the blocks in here. Let's get rid of our set x to 250. We can say, let's use a go-to block instead. Say go to x 250. And we can use our operator then to pick a random number between minus 45. Minus 45 is where, let's see if we scroll down. So minus 45 is actually where the cloud is almost at now. So there's the lowest point for the cloud. And then we go all the way to the top. We say roughly about 160 as well is a good space to keep the cloud in. That way we can always see the cloud and it's not hovering off the edge of the screen. So now we can add that code in, and when we play the game, and we can see that the tree and the cloud move at pretty much the same time as well. What we can also do is, let me see if we can just put a wait block in there for maybe 1 second. Okay, so we see the trees and the clouds are moving nicely out of space for each other. Maybe just leave the 1 second one out and you'll be able to figure it out yourselves if what way you want to put that cloud in. For the bush, guys, we also changed the code a little bit as well. We said we wanted to change it a little bit differently, but let's have a look at some of the key. Well, let's have a look now just to see what we did with that bush. If I remember correctly, I sneaked a little bit of code into my backpack earlier on, and I said I'd show it to you guys now. So in this case, I edited the Make It Fly tutorial to say set X to 250 for this bush. Let's call it a bush as well instead of calling it sprite 1. I'll call it bush there. And we can say set X to 250, change to the next costume as well, and instead of saying repeat 50 times or repeat 100 times, we can say repeat and pick a random between 130 and 200 times. So why did I say 130? Well, we wanted to make sure that the bush is well and truly off the screen and it's away. Then we can change our X by 5, make sure it goes all the way down, and then once we go back up to the loop, we're back at set X to 250, change to the next costume, and then we're repeating again for a random amount of time. So if you want to do that for your clouds as well, guys, let's have a look. You can say pick a random and say anywhere between 100 times and say 150 times. Then we can have a look. And we can see that the clouds, the trees, everything is all moving along across the screen. And then once it's finished, it repeats, it jumps back to the front, and it changes the costume as well. So with that in mind, guys, we've looked at a lot already in today's lesson, so let's just take a break for a little moment. We'll see what were the key points there. Well, we looked at animating our characters first of all, that's our sprites. Well, how did we do it? Well, we looked at changing costumes. We used the next costume in this example. We used the wait 0.05 seconds as well, and that was able to put all of that into a loop, and we're able to repeat that over and over again without worrying about anything else. Then we looked at using a repeat until not, which is a little bit funny because that's how we say it in programming terms. We say repeat until not pressing a key, which is a little bit funny because that's all of the words that you see in that block there, just in a different order. So that's how the computer would read it. It says repeat until not, key A pressed. And how do we read that? We read that as repeat until the A key is not being pressed. And we say that's what it reads. We say repeat until, and then we can bring this bit forward and say the A key is not being pressed. And that's why we use the operator underneath it. Then the last thing we looked at there, guys, was just changing and editing a bit of the code. If we have a look, we looked at the Make It Fly tutorial. We changed the costumes. We picked different bits of the code to change, so we could use an operator to repeat a random amount of time to change by. We can also change where we want it to start from, whether we want to set X or use a go to X instead. So lots of different points there, guys, and I hope you guys are all following along. If you're having any issues at all with it, don't hesitate to email me back, and I'll be happy to continue along with you guys and make sure that everybody understands the code. But now, just before we go, we have just enough time to cover one of the main topics, and that is jumping, guys. We're going to be looking at a lot of the jumping today. Lots of different ways to jump in Scratch. One of the main things we need to focus on when we're jumping is what coordinate we're going to be changing. So if you guys already have a good idea, and I'm sure you do, type it into the chat box now. Do we know which coordinate needs to change if we're moving up and down? I had a little bit of a look at this when we were changing the cloud. Does anybody know which block it is? Type it into the chat box there if you think you know. And there you go, it is the Y position. That's right, you guys. So What we're going to be looking at is changing the Y position first of all, and then changing it up to make it look like he's moving up, maybe making him wait for a few seconds and then making him jump back down by moving the Y position back downwards as well. So let's take a look at a few examples just to make sure we get our point across. Now for you guys who maybe haven't done maths, maybe haven't started doing physics in maths yet, don't worry about it. It's not that huge a deal. There are loads of different ways to get characters to jump in Scratch, and sometimes they don't involve any maths whatsoever. But if you'd like to do some of the more advanced jumping, we'll have a look at that as well. Let's take this example for instance and say when the W key is pressed, we can play the sound boing. We go boing, boing, boing. Then we're going to change Y by 10. We can wait for 0.2 seconds and then change Y by -10. So let's have a look at how that looks with Mario first of all. If we go back to Mario, and we'll, instead of using the W block, we'll use the up block for the moment. Or maybe we'll use the space key for this part, just to show you guys what it looks like. You can play the sound boing. Maybe we'll change Y by 20 just so that you guys can see how much he moves by. So we'll change Y by 20. We'll use our wait block to say, let's wait 0.2 seconds. And then we'll change Y, and I'll get rid of that wait block. Change Y by -20 as well. So then he goes up, waits, and comes back down. Let's have a look at how that runs now. Okay, so we can see there that Mario is jumping away, and that's great. That's exactly what we wanted him to do, but it's a little bit static, isn't it? It doesn't really do much. You jump up for like half a second, and that's about it. Now, it's okay if you have a game where there are enemies coming towards you, and you have to jump over them to keep going in the game. But if you're just looking to jump around and have a bit of fun jumping across platforms, it's not going to be very great. So what we can do, guys, is we can improve on that code. Let's have a look at adding a jumping loop. How do we do that, guys? Well, we use the repeat block to say we want to repeat moving upwards, and then we can use another repeat block straight after that and say repeat until, and what we're going to be waiting until we do. So if we keep jumping up and up and up, we want to make sure that we're coming back down until we are touching either the ground or the platform as well. So that's what we'll use in this example here. We could use when the up arrow key is pressed, we can play the sound boing. Now this is where we can switch the costume to our jumping costume. Like I said, we won't need it in this tutorial, so don't worry about it. Then we can change our repeat by 10, so we can change Y by 7, so we make it move up by 7, and then we can repeat until touching color brown, which is the color of the ground, as I said. And we can change my Y by -7 until we do that. So let's have a look now at that. I'll duplicate this code for a second, guys, just so you guys can see all the different types of jumping. We have our, let's say our up arrow in this case. We can play the sound boing. And instead of changing Y by 20 and -20, we're going to change that. So let me just drag the space key over here for just a moment, so that can give me a bit of room over here. Now we're going to use our repeat 10 block first. We can change Y by 7. Same way we would change X by 7, we're going to change Y by 7 too. Then we can use a repeat until block to say, well, now that we've gone up and up and up, we've gone up by 70 in fact. Now we need to start thinking about coming back down. So we use a repeat until, and we'll change Y by -7. We want to keep going back down -7, so if we're standing on the top of a ledge, on one of the platforms, we want to keep falling down. So we want to say keep touching it until we are touching the color, that is the ground. And that's why we use our touching color block. And we'll change that color by clicking in the color box, hovering over the ground on the stage, and we can see the color changes to brown, which is exactly what we wanted. Let's try it out again. So what happened there, you guys, right? Okay, let's have a look at that again. The first platform showed up, And just like we did with the tree and the clouds, the platform showed up and it got to the end of the screen and then it came back. But most importantly, because we set that platform to the same color as the ground, Mario, when we pressed the up key, went changed up by 7 all the way on top, and then when it was touching the brown color on top, it said let's not repeat this anymore and let's get out of it, which means we're now able to jump up top of platforms without having to come back down as well. So that's the first example of a really good jumping tutorial right there. And that's the first example that we're like, okay, this one's really good. Let's have a look, keeping this one for the moment. And let's also take a look at using gravity as well. So what you'll need for jumping with gravity, guys, this is for some of the more advanced scratchers out there. If you're just new to Scratch, don't worry about it. You can use the one that we just talked about there. If you're more advanced, you've already started making platforms, maybe you want to take a look at what jumping looks like with gravity involved. Let's have a look at what you'll need. So we'll need a variable called y velocity first of all. And that's our y velocity there. So I called it yvel. And we also need another variable called gravity as well. So we'll create another variable called gravity, and we'll set gravity to minus 0.34. Why do we set it to minus 0.34? Well, that is just a maths term we use for gravity, and if you think about it any more than that, then you'll have to write an entire paper on gravity. So don't worry about it, guys. What we're going to be doing today is setting gravity to minus 0.34 and then changing our y velocity. So what is y velocity, guys? It's just how fast y changes. So we can change y by 7, or we can change y by 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and then slowly go back down as well. So we can gradually fall off the platforms too. And this is for more advanced scratching, guys. So don't worry about it if you don't get it the first time around. Check out the recording as well and make sure that you follow along with it step by step, and once you have it put into your project, you might find you understand it a little bit more. And of course, don't forget to ask your science teachers as well, what is gravity, how does gravity work, why do my sprites jump up and down and not fall properly? This is a question for your science teachers, guys. So let's have a look at adding these blocks of code in. We need first of all to grab our velocity and our gravity. How do we do that? Well, we go to Luigi, we say Luigi, let's go into our data tab, and look, we have our gravity and our y velocity. If I check them out here, we have Luigi's gravity is set to minus 0.34, and let's just make sure it stays that way. So we'll use when our green flag is clicked, we can set the gravity to minus 0.34. Then we can say, well, okay, that's the gravity sorted out. Let's check out the y velocity. Now the y velocity is a load of different numbers. So let's just change that as well. Let's change it to, well, it doesn't matter what our y velocity is. Let's just change y velocity by minus 0.2. Why are we using the change block here, guys? Well, let's take one more look at it. We're going to be using a forever loop. We're going to say change our y position by the speed or the velocity. So we're going to use change y by y velocity. Now y velocity is already a weird number, but we're going to constantly be changing y velocity by minus 0.2. So that means it's going to be a dynamic change. It's going to be happening forever. So it might mean that your sprite might bounce a little when he's on the ground. He might just kind of bounce just up and down a little bit. Don't worry about it, guys, though. It's a perfectly normal thing to do, especially in platformers. So let's have a look here. Might grab our y block, change y, and we're going to use our data block as well. So we'll say change y by y velocity. Whoops, and we'll get another forever block as well. So we'll just add everything in there. Let's check out our code again. What do we have? We've changed y velocity here by minus 0.2, so that is another important number as well, guys. Normally I tell you the numbers aren't important, but for today's lesson, these two numbers are very important. So make sure you add them into your code. And we have our change y velocity and then change y. So that y is important as well, guys, because that's the y for our sprite. Whether you're working on Luigi or you're working on Mario, you want to change the y by the y velocity, because the y velocity variable is always going to be changing. It's going to constantly be changing, and that's why you want to tell Mario to change it dynamically with this variable as well. So that's what our code looks like now. Brilliant, means we are on top of things so far. And we are running a little bit over time, guys, so don't worry about it. We'll just quickly fly through the rest of it. The next thing we need to do is start jumping with the gravity as well. So what happens if we're touching the ground, we need to set the velocity to equal ground times velocity. What does that mean it'll do? It means it's going to reset the velocity to just stay just above 0. It's going to just change it a little bit to stay just above 0. And then we can say change y by the velocity again, which means that the y velocity will just kind of hover around 0. It means it might be a little bit of bouncing around, but it's okay. It won't be that noticeable. If we add that in next, then obviously when we have to actually jump, and we can say when the W key is pressed and the velocity is greater than 0, then we can set the y velocity to 4. So what does that mean will happen? It means that y is going to change by 4 all of a sudden. So next thing we're going to see a huge increase in Luigi jumping up and all of a sudden slowly coming back down as gravity and velocity take hold of him. So we'll have a look, guys, if you need that explained further, do type it into the chat box or give me a quick email, ask me to explain it again in the next lesson. For the moment, we're going to have to move quickly on and add the code in. So let's have a look here. If I just drag this up a little bit further, maybe get rid of my D for a second. As you can see, guys, Luigi has the exact same code as Mario. The only difference, we used a next costume and a weight minus 0.05. We used the next costume. We said switch costume to 02, 03, and 04 here instead. And instead of using the up, down, left, and right, we used W, A, S, and D in this example here. So let's have a look at adding in our gravity, guys. Let's change the color. Say if we're touching the color and we set the color brown, which is the same color as our platform, we can set the y velocity. So let's take our set variable in, say the y velocity, and say we're going to use two operators here. We're going to use our AND operator. We're going to use our greater than operator as well. So we can say that if the y velocity, I'll just take a copy of my y velocity there. So the y velocity is greater than 0, and if the W key is pressed, now to get the W key I'm going to have to scroll all the way to the bottom here. There we go. So if the y velocity is greater than 0 and if the W key is pressed, then we're going to set our y velocity to 4. Now, forgive me guys, I've just gotten a little bit confused by the code there. What I should have been saying, that is the next part. Let's just take a break here for a second, recap what we're doing. So we are saying if we're touching the W key, and the y velocity is greater than 0, so just remember to add this block in at the bottom. We can set the velocity to 4. So that's what we were talking about there. Apologies, I got a little bit confused. And we can add that in at the bottom there, guys. So now you can see there is code for when we're touching the ground, and that is separate to if we are already on the ground and we are pushing the jump key. What do we need to do when we are touching the ground? That is the next question. So what I'll do is I'll throw this code out here for a second and we can work on it separately. So the first thing we need to do is also set the y velocity again. So we'll drag another one in. This time we're going to need to multiply gravity by velocity. So we'll use gravity there. We'll take out another y velocity. And if we're multiplying, guys, we already know which operator we're going to use. We're going to be using the multiplication operator with the little star sign in the middle. And then we can set our y velocity to equal that. Then it's the exact same, guys, as we used here. Let me just duplicate this code. Throw out the access code, don't need it. We'll use our change y by y velocity. So that's what happens if we're touching the ground. But what you might notice if you push this code in on top, now you have your gravity, you have your changing your y velocity. What happens if we're touching the ground? And what happens if we're pressing the jump key? Well, what you might find is that Luigi, and let's play it to see. So guys, could you spot the problem there? Well, the problem was Luigi seems to fall down all the time. He doesn't seem to be standing still when we're not jumping. He just seems to be falling down onto the bottom of the screen, which means gravity has got too much of a pull. Could you imagine if gravity was like that in real life? If you were sitting at your chair and gravity just kept pulling you closer and closer to the ground, what would you do? You'd have to always constantly be jumping to make sure you stayed above the ground, which isn't really how gravity works. So for this, guys, this is where it gets a little bit mathsy. What we can do is we can repeat that code. We can say change y by y velocity, and if we're still touching the ground, change y by y velocity again. So you can do this over and over again, and what that will do is it'll increase our velocity and say, alright, gravity is taking too much of a hold, so we'll just keep bouncing up and up and up. And that's why we get a little bit of a bounce when we're touching the ground. So let's have a look at that, guys, and add it into our code. How do we add it in? Let's take our change y by y velocity. Let's take our touching color. Actually, we'll take our if block there. Whoa, took too much. Okay, let's see. Get rid of all of that. Here's what we can do. So now we have our y block, touching color, brown for the ground, and we can change y by the velocity. If we duplicate that code, we can add another one inside. It's exactly the same. So now we have, if we're still touching the ground, change the y value to go up. If we're still touching the ground after that, change the y value to go up again. And that's what we do. We put them all into the first the first if decision. And that's to say, when the gravity is multiplied by the velocity, make sure that we stay above the ground instead of falling through it. And guys, that is one of the more advanced ways to jump. That's jumping with gravity in your game. So let's have a look, guys. That's all we really have time for in today's lesson. Let's have a look at what you guys are going to be doing after today's lesson. Well, you can start making your platformer, guys. So start working on some animations for your characters. Make the background move as well. So that's using the Make It Fly tutorial. And of course, let's see how you get your sprites to jump. So what did I say there was? There was 3 types of making your sprites jump. There was a really simple one where we changed y by 20, made it wait for 2 seconds, and then changed y by minus 20. Or we could use a loop to do that. We could say repeat until we've gotten up, and then repeat all the way up, then repeat until we're touching the ground. So that let us touch the platforms as well and give us a great base to start working on. Or if you'd like to try out some of the more advanced code, absolutely try adding in gravity. If you have any trouble with that, guys, email me, and that's email me at kids.coding@shawacademy.com. In the next lesson, and this will be the final lesson of our course, guys, we are going to be talking about adding coins to your platformer. So collecting coins and making a score as well. I'm sure you guys will already know how to do most of that. We're also looking at avoiding lava pits as well. So that's if you touch the red parts of the game, you might die, you might go back to the start, who knows. And of course, with all of these platformer games, how do you win? What are we going to do to win the game? Well, there's going to be a flag at the end of the level, and once you grab that flag, you can win the game. So we'll have a little bit more. We'll be working on the same project, you guys, so don't worry about it. If you haven't finished it by now already, you can absolutely watch the recording